I am really excited to chat with you all today about the wheel of the year and the seasons. And um, this is my first year in 12 years being back in the States. So I am excited to have a new perspective on this with new eyes. So I'd love to know, those of you that are here early, I'd love to know where you're at in the world, and what what the outside world is telling you. So what seasons, what are you noticing? What are you noticing about the world around you and the season that you're in? Yeah. So if you need to take a look outside. Um, Something you have been noticing in the past few days, or the past few weeks, how the change has happened. I'll share a little bit about I am on the lands of the traditional lands of the Monongahela, the Osage, the Lenape people, and the Shawnee people. What is now known today as um, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in Western Pennsylvania. And I have been going on frequent hikes in the past, since we moved here about, gosh, it'll be 4 weeks tomorrow since we moved to this place. And we have a local park that has hiking trails that I've been going, pretty frequently throughout the week. And noticing last month when we moved in, or when we were looking for our house earlier in October, just noticing like one or two leaves, like changing, but everything was really like green and lush at that point still. And, within the hike, everything felt like full of life. And then like 2 weeks ago, everything was changing colors, right? There were these bright yellows, bright reds, oranges, some browns coming in, and noticing the leaf cover like on the forest floor. And then like I just went on a hike again yesterday, and as I was walking, I noticed like over the hill, there was like this house that I had never seen before. And I was like, how have I never seen that before? And I'm like, oh yeah, because now the trees are bare, right? The trees, they've almost all lost their leaves, and I can see through to see what's on the other side. And all the leaves, on the forest floor now are like brown and crunchy and starting to decompose. And it's been really lovely to be in that transition, just over the last month, and noticing that. So we are here. We're going to chat a bit about the Wheel of the Year. I first want to just sort of recognize the name, called the Wheel of the Year. It was sort of adopted by some witchy druid folks in the 1950s, and the really like the Wiccan community has made it more well known in the past few decades or so. And some of it they have adopted from a more historical standpoint, and some of them are newer and have names on them because there's not a lot of history to the points on the Wheel of the Year. So I'll talk about each one of those and which ones are which. So we're just going to go through each one of them, and we'll sort of see what the thread is that moves through the Wheel of the Year. And then we'll talk at the end a little bit about how to live in alignment with the seasons, what that may look like for you. So this is the concept of the Wheel of the Year is very Eurocentric, but I do know that the same concept is in many other places, around the world. So do look at like your own culture, your own cultural heritage, to see if there are sort of like festivals or marking points along the year that would be sort of like your own cultural wheel of the year, instead of like what I'm sharing today comes out of a more Eurocentric um, worldview. And that's based on my own heritage of my, you know, English, Scottish, um, German, Swedish heritage that I have. So just saying that. So if you come from a different cultural background, do look into your own and see what these sort of festivals hold for you. What has been known in history is that the Anglo-Saxon people were more focused on celebrating the solstices and the equinox. And the Celtic people were more interested in celebrating what they call the cross-quarter days, which would be the days in between the solstices and equinoxes, and they're also known as the four fire festivals. And so with those, both the equinoxes, both the solstices, and all of the cross-quarter days, that creates 8 points along the wheel of the year. I wish I had like an image to show you. The only thing I did have is just last week I did a year ahead tarot spread along the wheel of the year, and I drew a little image for it. So I will show you that just to give you an idea, but you'll also see my tarot spread as well. So this is it. So you'll see I've got like the summer solstice and the winter solstice. We've got the spring equinox, the autumn equinox. Then the cross-quarter days are Beltane, Lughnasadh, Samhain, which we just had, and Imbolc. And so then, this is the year that we move through every year. And you sort of see, I drew some images. We have the snowflakes and the pine trees, and then the seed growing roots and growing stronger. Then the flowers, the sunflower. Beltane is one of the largest fire festivals, as well as Samhain. So there's got the bonfire, the sun. Then we move over into like the wheat harvest. This is the beginning of harvest season. The berries, the apples, the leaves, the pumpkins, all of that. So that's just a little image. Here in the center, you'll see I drew half in the sun and half in the dark moon, just the light and the dark. And we're going to start exploring with Samhain. And it is the beginning of the dark half of the year, as the Celtic people saw it. And a lot of people talk about it being also like a new year for people that follow along with the wheel of the year, because the Celtic peoples thought that, everything starts with darkness and then moves towards the light and then back to dark again. But the beginning is beginning in the dark. What I will say is the 2 solstices and the 2 equinox, right, have a fixed point. Right? They have a fixed point exactly when, on the equinoxes, when the light and dark is equal that day and night, and the solstices when, the winter solstice with the longest night and the summer solstice with the longest day, right? So those are fixed points on the wheel. Now, the 4 cross-quarter days can be celebrated more as like seasons that can be a bit longer than just one day. They can also be celebrated, what a lot of people I've heard talk about, celebrated around the dark moon that's closest to the in-between, both the solstice and the equinox. Whatever dark moon is in the midpoint can celebrate the cross-quarter day on that day. Some people have put it more calendar-wise, where Samhain would be October 31st into November 1st. The other important thing is you always celebrate the night before into the day as well. So it usually encompasses 2 days. So October 31st into November 1st. So you can sort of like, and some people wait until they notice like a physical change in the world around them, in the land around them, to sort of enter into that seasonal, that next seasonal energy. Instead of like, trying not to be so fixed to the Gregorian calendar, which I really appreciate. So we'll begin with Samhain, also known as like Halloween, right? All Souls Day, if you're in the Christian culture. Um, there's the Day of the Dead. There is Diwali is also at this time. Like my spouse is Hindu, and so we celebrated Diwali along with Samhain, in honoring both of our ancestors and um, carrying the light into the darkness, the dark half of the year ahead. And it is the last harvest festival. So it's sort of the end of harvest. Everybody, gathered all of your things from the fields, and it's time to prepare for the winter. This is also the time that farming people in the Celtic region would have brought their cattle and their animals from the winter or from the summer fields. They would have brought them down towards the winter stables. And what they did during this time would light large bonfires. So both Samhain and Beltane are known as the two like the strongest fires in the wheel of the year. So they would light these bonfires and they would walk the cattle through the bonfires as a way of a sign of protection for them going into the winter, and like a blessing so that the people could survive through the winter with what these animals could provide for them. So this time, I'm sure you've heard somebody say, like the veil is thin at Samhain, and the idea is just that it's a liminal space because it's transitioning. Samhain is a transition from autumn to winter, and it is a transition where it's easier to access what is in the Celtic world is called the other world, or you can call it the spirit world, the divine consciousness, whatever you want to put, whatever words work for you on that. And so there's a lot of work with ancestors, and people do a lot of divination at this time. That's when I did my year ahead tarot spread, was right after Samhain. And this is also a time for me personally, I reflect back on the past year. It's sort of that big transition between reflecting back. What am I gathering in from my harvest from last year? And then, like I said, I did my tarot spread to look forward. So it was reflecting back and looking forward. And I'll share with you during the winter solstice, I do some dreaming, envisioning for the year ahead, and I make a wish jar. We actually do that every year in my coven, the Sacred Cycles Coven. We make wish jars, and then at Samhain is when I open my wish jar and I reflect on those wishes that I had from last year. So moving into the winter solstice, which can also be called midwinter or Yule, or in the Druid calendar, it's called Albin Arthen. And this is obviously the longest night of the year and the shortest day. And transitioning, after the winter solstice to the days becoming longer and the light growing from there. So, yeah, each point is sort of like a transition marker where you can mark, okay, here I am in the darkest point of the year, but I know every day after this, the light continues to grow, right? Um, the the evergreen tree, which has been carried over into Christmas traditions, was chosen as a symbol for the power of life to survive through every season of the year. And so, sort of like that energy of like light over darkness, and bringing that into the home is symbolizing, like we have the power to survive anything that comes in any season of our life. And so that's sort of a ritual that you can do if you get a Christmas tree and you bring your Christmas tree into the house, maybe wanting to make some sort of ritual or marking of um, noticing that this is how I have survived so far up to this point, and I will continue to survive with what life hands me. So that can be a beautiful thing to bring in. Also, we've got, like the Yule log. So you like keep your Yule log and then you light the fire that will start the new year coming forward. Um, yeah, so like I said, for me, like the winter solstice is the time that I dream forward. I vision for, the next year. And for those of us in the northern hemisphere, it aligns pretty nicely with the new year. And I know a lot of people do dreaming and visioning into the new year. I just move that forward a little bit and dreaming into the new year beginning at the winter solstice. And like I said, we make those wish jars. At the winter solstice, and then I keep it closed all year round until I get back to Samhain. So the next point along the year is Imbolc. So I'm just bringing you back to my spread here. So we talked about Samhain being the beginning of the dark half of the year. The winter solstice, we've got the longest night, moving gradually into Imbolc, which is the transition between winter and spring. And with Imbolc, the name means different things. You'll hear different places, but I've often heard it referred to as in the belly. And this is a reference to pregnant sheep that would have, this is the time that most of the sheep would be pregnant in their, fertility cycle. And so it brings back this hope of like life to come, right? But it's still very much like a waiting period, because in a lot of places, this is around in the northern hemisphere around the end of January, beginning of February. In the southern hemisphere, this would be the end of July, beginning of August. And so it's very much still like, okay, we're still waiting for the life to come, but it kindles that sort of fire of hope. And having like the first signs of spring, like for those that are in places that get like snowdrops, where the flowers push up through the snow and give us some sign of like life to come, which is, one of the symbols for Imbolc. This festival, our marking of the year, has become very closely associated with Brige or Bridget or Saint Bridget, depending on how you see her, and being a time of like healing, a time of that like inner fire, the inner fire that is associated with Brige. And making sort of like pledges or affirmations that you're like putting the seeds, right? The seeds are planted during this time. This would be a time that people would start planting seeds indoor around this season, that then will be transferred, once the snow has thawed out. And also that energy of like spring cleaning, of like getting ready, preparing for the new life to come. So putting it back in like the pregnancy terms, right? Thinking about that time of nesting, where you're getting everything ready, putting everything in place so that when the spring finally arrives, like everything is in order and everything's ready to go for the new life to come. Yeah, the other names for Imbolc are, so in the Christian tradition we have Candlemas. So, the Christians took a lot of the festivals and markings of the wheel of the year from the Celts and the Anglo-Saxons whenever they were dominating at that time, colonizing at that time. And so that turned into Candlemas, if you're familiar with that. And then we also have this tradition of Groundhog Day. If any of you are familiar with Groundhog Day, you know, I grew up about 10 miles away from Punxsutawney, where Groundhog Day takes place. But it came from Germany as a way to um, mark this time of year, mark this transition, and to see, you know, is the winter going to conquer the spring, or is the spring going to conquer the winter? You know, is there 6 more weeks of winter, or is the spring coming around the corner? So it's sort of like this divination, as you know, wildly as you think it may be, right? This groundhog is divining whether you know, the winter or the spring is going to win out in the coming in the weeks after Imbolc, leading up into the spring equinox. Okay, so moving forward, we went through Samhain, we went through the winter solstice, went through Imbolc. Now we come to the spring equinox, right? So equal day and night. The druid name is known as Alban Elir, if you are a druid or interested in that. And this obviously is, now we're here, arrived at the springtime. This is the time of like the dawn, the early morning. You know, we talked about fertility starting, like, you know, the gestational time of fertility starting at Imbolc, and now spring is the time that, okay, things are coming to life, things are being birthed. And so that's why, you know, around Easter, which is comes around the same time, has a lot of cultural symbols with like eggs and rabbits, right? So we have these two symbols, eggs being a symbol of fertility, rabbits being a symbol of fertility because they have two uteri that they can continually get pregnant back and forth between their two uteri, and so that's why that they are known for being very fertile, right? And so a lot of things like rebirth, renewal, and like being, you know, coming into life again. So that is the spring equinox. Yeah, I don't know what else to share really about the spring equinox. It's interesting because that's like my birthday lands on the spring equinox, around the spring equinox, like 2 days after the spring equinox. And well, if you study astrology, that's also the beginning of the astrological calendar as well, with Aries season. So that's another alignment that if you want to enter into, you know, the wheel of the astrological calendar, you can implement that as well. Okay, and then we have the other transition point, the beginning of the light half of the year. So we just went through these ones, and now we're back to Beltane. So Samhain and Beltane were seen as like the two biggest festivals. Samhain into the dark half, Beltane into the light half. And so Beltane also lands around the time of May Day, if you know May Day, and the beginning of May, that time of year. Again, beginning the light half of the year, beginning of the summer, or some people see it as, you know, the transition space between spring and summer. It's like a full-on celebration now. We're fully celebrating the light. We are fully celebrating fertility. This was a time where a lot of people were handfast or were married in the Celtic yearly rituals. This was a time known where unions were coming together and celebrating, you know, life together now. And again, this was when they built a lot of bonfires, but there would have been, people would have built these two large bonfires to take their cattle and their livestock, again, from the winter stables and now up into the summer pastures. And so that was like one of the main marking points to walk your cattle through these bonfires as protection and blessing, that they would, flourish and be well nourished in the summer pastures. And there's lots of dancing. There's a lot of sexual energy during Beltane. We've got the maypole, if you're familiar with the maypole, that happened at Beltane. And also, I talked about at Samhain the veil being thin between human world and the other world or the spirit world. It happens again at Beltane, which people don't talk about as much because it's not as sort of like dark and spooky. It's more like happy and light. But something that comes through at this time is really like the fae folk. So especially like around hawthorn trees, and wells are very important, like spring wells that are in the ground. This would be a time where you like hang what's called like a kudi, which you would hang on the trees near a well, making wishes and making offerings like to the fae folk, so that they wouldn't they can be a little bit trickster-ish, however you say that. And so doing things to sort of like appease them, so that they didn't come and like dwell in your home or things and like cause things to break and things to happen. And so Beltane also, again, that time to ask for protection against some of these sort of spirits or tricksters that want to create some challenges in your life, but also like blessings for the life and the fertility that you have. So then we're fully into the light half of the year, coming into, of course, the summer solstice, which some people have called Litha, also, or midsummer. In the Druid world, it's called Albenhefen. And again, this is the longest day of the year and the shortest night. And there is a lot of just, again, continuing sort of with the energy of Beltane, but a marking of the light and lots of feasting, right? Being outdoors, gathering, community, having barbecues and eating, fresh fruits and sweets and lots of flowers. Often see like flower crowns being like a symbol that people will wear for the summer solstice. Yeah, and just really, really honoring that light, the lightness and the light in the sky, right, at the summer solstice. There is also, I didn't mention on the winter solstice, but in some mythology, there is a story between sort of like a battle that goes on between the Holly King and the Oak King. So thinking about like the holly bushes or trees and the oak tree, right? And so they say at the summer solstice, the Holly King has triumphed over the Oak King in their battle. And so that's recognizing that, like, from here moving forward, the darkness is growing as the Holly King is reigning over that half of the year. And then at the winter solstice, the Oak King triumphs over the Holly King and grows in strength as it moves, as you move forward from that point. And so you can, that was just a myth that people came up with by observing, right? Observing the world around them. So maybe there is something in your environment that could symbolize this as well. Like, what happens at the summer solstice? What marks, like, okay, now the nights are getting longer and the day is getting less, or at the winter solstice, what is marking this time in my environment, saying and showing that the light is growing from here. Alexandra, do I know much about the Green Man? I'm always interested in hearing people's perspective and stories of him. I can never find anything straightforward regarding him. Alexandra, I do not. I mean, I'm familiar with the Green Man, and the horned god, and sometimes they are the same, sometimes they are different. Like I hear it different places, different stories, different places, which I'm sure is what you're pointing to. And so I really feel like things like the Green Man, similar to what I said, is like it has probably been that idea has been adapted, that myth, that folk has been adapted by people depending on their own personal environment, or like by communities, by their own environment around them. And so that's probably why it's hard to find any sort of like, definitive, like this is how it is. Like when we're talking about myth and folk, um, you know, and like I've studied with Sharon Blackie, if any of you are familiar with her, as a mythologist, and the idea that like actually myths and folk like should be living, like they shouldn't be, dead in that time, in that place, right? They have a life to them, and they change, and they adapt, and they move depending on the environments that we're in. And that's why I think it's like, we can talk about cultural appropriation when we talk about this, right? Like there are myths and folk that are just made for that place, that are just made for that land, for that people, because that is their experience. And then wherever you live, it's going to be different. And it could be flavored, right, by whatever this person across the world understood, the light half of the year and the dark half of the year this way. And here, I understand that I do have a light half of the year and a dark half of the year, but in my environment, like here's the story that comes from that. And so I really appreciate, Sharon Blackie talks about that a bit. She's based in the UK, in Wales right now, and has a lot of her, a lot of her learning has been in Celtic mythology, right? And she did live here in the US for some time and realized that the gods and goddesses that are in Celtic mythology show up like very similar energy in like Native American mythology. They have different names and they have different expressions, but it's sort of like the same energy is being expressed through different gods and goddesses. And so that's why it's like I think it's really beautiful that like we can learn from other cultures and learn sort of like the underlying archetypes, right? The universal archetypes that we all experience. But when we take on something ourselves, like let's take it on for our own experience, like the land we are on, the life we are in, and like let's not be afraid to create our own myths and our own folk stories, um, that describe our own unique experience, right? So that was a very long side note, to say that, like, I say take what you've learned about the Green Man and adapt it to your own understanding in the land that you are actually in. And maybe there's like some specific tree that represents the Green Man for you, and like notice that tree as it goes throughout all of the seasons, and what that could tell you about who the Green Man is, right? Something like that. Yeah. Carol, very interesting. I grew up in Egypt. A lot of the symbols and folk are related to harvest and springtime and the cold and the story time of the year. Beautiful. The Christian experience in Egypt has a lot of the Eastern folk intertwined. Yep. I didn't know anything about the holly and the ivy and all these symbols when I was in Egypt. Yeah, it's very interesting. And there are threads of like, when we're talking about here, we're talking about the Celtic wheel of the year mainly. And like I said in the beginning, it's very Eurocentric, mainly in the Celtic tradition and Anglo-Saxon tradition. But you'll see a lot of this carried over into the Christian traditions when they were, colonizing the Celtic peoples. And so noticing that whenever colonization happens wherever in the world, there is going to be some things that the colonizers, they steal, right? Colonizers steal. So the um, steal from the peoples, the native peoples of that land, and centuries later, you will see those show up in the current place, right? So that's sort of like the whole idea I'm sharing. Like, let's try and not be, culturally appropriating from somebody else, and holding that like colonizer archetypal energy within us when we're connecting to our spirituality, or how we connect to life. Yeah. Side note. Okay. We got two more left along the wheel. We just did the summer solstice. And after the summer solstice, we come into the harvest season. So the first harvest season, known as Lughnasadh, or Lammas, if that's also it's the Christian name for what Lughnasadh was before the Christians arrived there. And so this is the first of the harvest festivals, mainly for wheat and grains. And I love that they're harvested first, because those are sort of like the foundation of the the foundational base of our of our meals, of our food. Whether you eat wheat and grains or not. I can't eat wheat, but I still love that sort of energy. Like, the first things we harvest are the things that are like the staples of the diet. And around, Lughnasadh was named this by the god Lugh. And in an Irish myth and folk, Lugh's mother gave her life for the land in the harvest. And so there's sort of like this dual energy between celebrating and it's also like honoring like the beginning of like things are dying. Like, this is the beginning of things starting to decay and decompose, and also we are gathering what is still useful and nourishing for us. So there's a bit of this dual energy that comes in the harvest season, right? So we are harvesting everything that we want to take with us, and we are letting go of the stalks that are still left in the field to decay and compost into what will be fertile soil for next year. And so, yeah, there's a lot of like, baking bread, making corn dollies, like those sort of things happen here at Lughnasadh. It's still very much like summertime energy. In the northern hemisphere, it'd be the end of July, beginning of August. In the southern hemisphere, this would be the end of January, beginning of February. So still like the warmth, lots of like golden colors, oranges, those type of colors, and first harvesting, the staples of our diets, wheat and grains and rice and all of that. And then the last one on the wheel is the autumn equinox. What is known in the Druid calendar as Alban Elphid. And this is the second harvest festival, mainly things like apples, right? This is the time, it's equal day and light, usually towards the end of September. So we've got apples, berries, squash, and root vegetables are coming around now. And this is actually the time that I celebrate Thanksgiving. So for those of you that are in the States and getting ready for, like the American Thanksgiving that, has a whole nother story of colonization with it that I'm not going to get into. But like for those of you that want to honor like the Wheel of the Year calendar, like the autumn equinox would be the time to have the Thanksgiving. It's like the biggest harvest time. It's the second one where you can both still have the grains from the first harvest and really like make a lovely table and meal with all of the vegetables and fruits that can be harvested during the autumn equinox, and spend some time in Thanksgiving and gratitude, because then going into the next point of the wheel, right? From the autumn equinox moving down to Samhain is then the beginning of the dark half of the year again. So this is a time, it's like that last celebration to like really give thanks and gratitude before preparing yourself to go into the dark half of the year. Those are the 8 points, that we have along the year. So let's talk about just like in general, living in alignment with these different seasons. And like I shared, I just did my year ahead tarot, but I didn't do it. A lot of people do year ahead tarot spreads based on the month. Like they'll do one in January and pull a card for each month. I did mine for each season, right? So between now and the winter solstice, I've got the 10 of Cups, which has been really lovely to have. Very interesting at this time of year, but like I'm feeling into the 10 of Cups right now, and so like each season, I've decided to focus on a different card and really step away again from the Gregorian calendar that we seemed to be so enmeshed with in a lot of our lives, right? And step into a more seasonal calendar. So that's something you could do if you're interested in doing a tarot spread year ahead, looking at the seasons instead of looking at the months. You could also do it based on the astrological wheel, because that would also be going seasonally connected, more to the lunar cycle than to the calendar months. Something is, eating seasonally is something that is a really beautiful practice, especially if you have access to things that are local, that are, grown by your local farmers, or in your backyard, right? If that is available for you. It's something I'm interested in doing more of, but we're still setting up our rhythms here, and coming here, right before winter has not been ideal. But I have been looking for like farm co-ops that do produce boxes, and those will change throughout the seasons depending on what is available at the farm. So, and my parents and my sister have been doing that for a while at the local farm where I grew up, which has been really really lovely to see that and to see them eating seasonally. So that's something I'm definitely interested in. Let me know if you are too. Yeah, and like doing seasonal rituals. Like I've been here on Insight Timer since I started. I think the very first ritual I did a live session on was Beltane, and not last year, but the year before. Oh, gosh, has it been that long? I've been here like a year and a half. Yeah. So Beltane of 2021, yeah, was the first ritual I held here, and I've held all 8 rituals every year so far since I've been here. And we'll be back again for the winter solstice coming up in December. If you want to join with me in marking the seasons and doing a little ritual together. Obviously, you can do it on your own as well. I usually do a personal ritual. I do a ritual that's free or by donation here on Insight Timer, and I do a ritual for those in my coven, the Sacred Cycles Coven. We do a ritual together. So usually, like those times of the year, yeah, they're very full. Sometimes a little overwhelming, but usually just very beautiful and full with all of the different rituals and things going on with that energy. It makes it a lot easier to connect in with the world, right? Connect in with the land, and then connect in with yourself and how you are in relationship with the world around you, with those seasons. So that is something beautiful that if you're invited into that, you can do. And I mean, like, I think like just a simple thing is just observing, right? Like we shared in the very beginning, those of you that were here early, just observing like what you've been noticing in the world around you. And I was saying that I've been hiking about 3 or 4 times a week since I've moved here 4 weeks ago, and noticing in that part of the woods the change that has happened in the last 4 weeks, from green and like full of life, like lush. It wasn't as lush as it would have been earlier in the summer, but still quite lush in mid-October, to like all the leaves changing reds and purples and yellows and oranges, and to I just went hiking again yesterday. Almost everything was bare, and I said, like, I noticed there was a house on a hill right behind the woods where I walked, and I never noticed it before. And I was like, oh, that's new. And I'm like, oh no, it's not new. It's just I can see it because there's no leaves now, like covering it, and so I can notice it more. And all of the leaves now being very brown and crunchy on the ground when I go walking. And so that's been really beautiful, just to like, I've just consciously marked that. Almost every time I go hiking, I'm consciously marking what is different, what is changing here. And that's like, not only like is it a beautiful practice to connect into the spirit of land, but I'm also thinking about like my body and my nervous system, right? Because going through transitions can be difficult, and especially if transitions in your life have been really difficult. But the more we can bring in some conscious awareness of like the not consistent, but like the being more consistent in marking those changes, marking those transitions, it's like a slow process, right? We're inviting in more slowness to the process, instead of, if you're unconsciously going about your day, and you arrive and there's snow on the ground and you're like, what? Like, what just happened? And you're like, I didn't even notice it was that time of the year. I didn't even notice that, like, and then you might have like a bit of a shock, like, how is it already winter? Like, how are we already here? Like, oh, it feels like I've missed out. I've missed out on the time, And so I have found that very soothing, to just spend time outside on the land and just noticing what is changing, what is moving, where is the life flowing, where is the life decaying. One of my favorite things that I found was this like skeleton of a leaf that I found about a week and a half ago, maybe 2, or right around Samhain I found it. And like this, just like having this reminder, right? That like life goes in a cycle and it decays and it becomes a skeleton. And like, but yet seeing the beauty in that, like, this leaf is beautiful, and like it's sitting on my altar right now because it's so beautiful to me. And this reminder that everything that we go through is going to go through a cycle, and that the decay and the death is is a part of it all, and not one side or the other side of the cycle is better or worse, right? It all is just is. Yeah. Hmm. Okay, the other thing I wanted to share is just connecting this to like the creative cycle in your work potentially, if it's possible for you. Because seasonal living, um, there are larger overarching themes with each season that you move through. And if you've been with me in my talks about menstrual cycle awareness, you'll sort of know what these are. But the time of winter, and this is why I was sharing at the winter solstice is my time to dream and vision, because that's what winter is about in the creative cycle. Winter is about, it actually has two energies. Going into winter is the time to rest, the time to be. It's actually the time like not to do anything, separate yourself from the outside world, which can be difficult if you have like large family gatherings for, the holidays, the end of the year. But, just bringing that conscious awareness there, like moving into winter, time to pause and just be. The second half of winter is visioning and dreaming, um, you know, creating those seeds that can be planted, right? And then moving into the spring is when the seeds start to, they grow roots and they start to become little seedlings, moving up from the dark soil. And so this is a time creatively to like play and explore and sort of see where is the best soil for these roots to grow into so that they can really like grow strong. Which seeds didn't get roots, and that's okay. And maybe that seed needs to be let go for this season. And it will become something new for next season, so recognizing that as you're just kind of being curious and playing around with it through the springtime. The summer, is a time then where the plants have fully blossomed. The crops are fully, in their fullness. I can't think of another word for that. And this is the time to manifest, right? So it's a time to like those seeds, those dreams that you had in winter, those seeds you planted and rooted into the spring, coming into the summer, let them come to fullness. Let them be realized in the world. And this is also the time, summer brings the time of like interacting and being social with others and around. So that aligns pretty beautifully if you're in the southern hemisphere, right? And you have sort of like Christmas, end of the year traditions, because that would be around the summer solstice time. So I can imagine that. I always thought growing up that would be really weird because Christmas in my mind is so associated with winter. But when you align it to the creative cycle, I'm like, oh, that'd be actually kind of really lovely to have like a Christmas, New Year's type of energy gatherings around the summer solstice, because that is the energy of gatherings, being social, focusing on collective energy. And then moving into the autumn time. And so for those of you that are in autumn now, moving into the winter, this is the time where you get to reflect, right? Harvest and gratitude. So like looking back over the last year, really harvesting what the gratitude and the joys that you want to carry with you, want to remember, and then letting go what did not work for you. Like what didn't work for you this year, or where are you on your path that just doesn't feel right, right? Where are you out of alignment in noticing and becoming aware of like those things you can let go of that you don't want to take into the next cycle. And then once you're able to like let go, separate yourself from the outside world again, and then come back into that rest and just being for the beginning of winter. So if there is like any sort of projects you have, or um, you just want to sort of like play with this creative energy, you could make that an intention um, for this next year. And like I said, like just a couple weeks ago at Samhain, like that's when I did my reflection time, my big reflection time of like what I'm letting go of, what wasn't working this year that I want to let go of that belief or that thought or that action that I was doing. And then coming into the winter solstice, I'm going to enter into some dreaming time. But then I actually like I don't Ideally, I like to take 6 weeks off between the winter solstice and Imbolc. Take 6 weeks off from my business. Um, when I have the capacity to do that, because that's my time to just rest and be and dream into what I want the next year to look like. And so thinking about your own dynamics, your own, it might not even be, your work, you might not be able to be that flexible. But maybe it is just in a rhythm in your house with your family or something like that you can bring in some of these seasonal energies throughout this next year, and really just taking time to honor the spirit of the land you're on. And, so it may look very different from what I just shared, because like I did say, this is it's very Eurocentric and has been adopted and come over, to North America more. But like in India where I lived, it looked very different. Like the seasons looked very different, um, and but still, like looking at the cultural celebrations and markings of the season, um, very similar in nature, and how because there's a archetypal energy to a lot of these seasons. So just be with where you are, like lean into where you are and asking those questions, like what am I noticing in the world? How can I become more aware of this, the spirit of this land, and be more connected in a way that I can honor that and live a more sustainable life. Like that's ideally, we can live more sustainable lives when we're moving at the same pace of our environment, right? And I talk about that a lot with menstrual cycle awareness as well. Or if you want to connect into the lunar cycle, if you don't have a menstrual cycle, right? Learning these rhythms of rest and being, and then of action and giving, right? So finding that cyclical flow, that cyclical balance, that is oftentimes shown to us in the world around us. All we got to do is be aware and bring in some consciousness to that. All right, lovely people. Hopefully, I'll see you again soon, and make sure you're following along so you can get updates when my next lives go. All right, sending you all lots of love, many blessings. Hope you have a wonderful night, afternoon, morning, wherever you are in the world. See you next time.